Hi and welcome back. In this assignment we're going to work on refining our selections. And you can download this image from this lecture. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a very good selection on these coffee beans, and then we're going to just modify the color a little bit. We're going to add kind of like a purple overlay to this to just kind of give these some more pop and some more richness. So first I'm going to hit the Alt key and I'm going to scroll in a bit so I can see this better. And then one thing I want you to get in the habit of doing is, first of all, you want to go to your layer and you want to lock that bottom layer just to preserve your original image. So you're working non-destructively. And then we're going to make a copy of this layer and we're going to work on that so that if we mess anything up, we'll still have this nice locked layer here that we can always go back to. And the way you do that is you either grab this and drag it down here to the new layer icon and do it like that, or let me unlock this and delete it and I'll show you another way to make a copy. Make sure you select it on that layer by clicking on it and hit Control J or Command J on a Mac. And you notice that made a copy, it didn't lock it, and it's basically just kind of ready to go. Okay, so now we can get in here and make our selection. And that way, if we do any destructive edits, which we're not going to, but if you did on accident, you'd still have this preserved layer down here. And now we're going to go grab our selection tool. And again, my favorite one is the Quick Select tool, which is this guy right here. And you can see right now I'm on the Move tool, but I'm going to use my keyboard shortcuts and I'm going to hit the W key. You'll notice it switches to the Quick Select tool and now I have it as my tool. And if for some reason it doesn't go to the Quick Select tool, you may have to hit Shift and W, because remember that will scroll you through these selection tools. And so if you happen to already be on the Magic Wand tool, you can just hit Shift and keep clicking and that will get you the Quick Selection tool. And we can change the size of our tool by hitting the square brackets. And you can go bigger or you can go smaller with the left bracket key. And fairly big is going to be good for this, for starters. And we'll just go right to our coffee beans and we'll start to click and drag around. And it's going to pretty quickly select what we need. And you kind of just go up to the edges if you need to make it a little bit smaller by hitting that square bracket so you can get into some smaller spots. That's fine. And then you can also zoom in, or you can hit Control 0 or Command 0 on a Mac to get in closer. And when we get in closer like this, you'll notice that what it did was it did a good job. Let me move to the Move tool so I have a pointer. I'm going to hit the V. Okay, it did a good job of selecting along some of these edges of the beans, but where it's kind of blurry or where there are shadows underneath, let me find a good one. Oh, right here's a good one. There's a shadow here that is dark, and so we've selected the shadow. But we don't want that shadow, because if we put a purple overlay on these beans, it's going to kind of give them a purple tinge, but we don't want to dye this white bowl purple. So what we need to do is make some refinements to our selections. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in more. I'm going to hit the Alt key and scroll. If that doesn't work for you, you can hit the Z key and then that gives you your zoom tool and you just click to zoom. Okay? Or to zoom back out, you hit the Alt key and you can zoom back out. But this is pretty good. Then we're going to switch to a different selection tool to make these refinements. The Quick Select tool is great for getting the bulk of it, but getting a sharp selection on these blurry blended areas with the Quick Selection tool is difficult. So what we're going to do is go to our Lasso tool. Remember that's this guy right here. And we're going to hit the L. And if it doesn't immediately come up for you or another selection tool comes up, you may have to hit Shift and L, and then you can toggle through them till you get to the regular Lasso tool. And since we've already made a selection with one tool, you may need to go into the Options menu up here, and you'll notice these little boxes here. The first one is to make a new selection. This one is to add to a selection. This one is to subtract from a selection. and this one is to intersect selections, which we won't worry about for now. But if you click Add to a Selection, then it's going to have the little plus sign next to your lasso tool, so you can start to add to this selection. And then if you were to click here, you could subtract from your selection and it'll have the minus sign. Or while you're in this tool, you just hit the Alt key and you'll notice it toggles it over there. So when I release the Alt key, it goes back to the Add, and when I hit the Alt key again, it goes to the Subtract. Okay? So now I'm going to go to some of these problem areas and I'm going to do a little modification. So for instance, there's a tiny little corner here that we probably don't want, so I'll hit the Subtract, use the Alt key. That's Option on your Mac, and I'm just going to draw a little corner right there to connect it and see how that just takes care of that shadow. Then we'll come around to here. It looks like that one's actually probably okay, but we'll make it a little better. And if you need to zoom in more to do this more accurately, then you can. Just going to draw as carefully as I can. We're zoomed in enough that this isn't going to need to be totally perfect, but you still want to do as good of a job as you can. And again, I'm pressing the Alt key before I start to draw, and just following the contour of these beans. Oops, missed a spot right there. If you have a island out there, then you can just draw around it like that. So you get everything. A couple little spots right here. This is definitely worth taking your time on, because the next step is going to be fast and easy, but if you've done a poor job of doing your selection, then the next step is going to look kind of sloppy. Okay, so we're looking pretty good so far. We're going to hit the space bar to go to our Move tool and slide around the side. You can just follow the contours and see what needs help. Again, hitting the Alt or Option key to subtract from the selection. Oh, I got a little crazy there. It's okay. Looks good. Looks good. And if for some reason I accidentally chop way in here like this, oops, get rid of that, and I've cut off part of the bean, then without holding the Alt or Option key, you can add to your selection, just add that little piece back in. And you may need to just circle it out like that to enclose the whole thing. There we go. Couple more. And so this is an example of a exercise that I definitely want you to download this and practice. Okay, space bar to slide around. So you can just see what I'm doing here. Sometimes this is kind of an arbitrary little spot, but we'll do like that. That's okay. Here's a really good one. That's a lot of shadow underneath there. Okay, spacebar, click and drag. There's a spot where we need to add part of that bean back in. So we just scoop around there like that. We'll get rid of a tiny little bit of the shadow. And you know what I'll do? I will leave one part of this shadow selected so that you can see what it would look like if we don't do it right. So I'm going to slide over to this one. This is a good spot right here. Let's just select a whole chunk of shadow right there. Oops, I meant to do a circle to close that in. Okay, so now we have some shadow selected right there. Actually, we got to clean this up a little bit. There we go. And I don't want that much, so I'm gonna go like that. Okay, so we've got a little shadow accidentally selected there, so you can see what happens when we do these modifications. Okay, so let's go back to full screen. We'll hit Control-0. Now we have our selection. Now we're going to add an adjustment layer to change just these coffee beans, okay? And the way we do that is we just go to our adjustment layers, click on it, and we're going to do a solid color. So this is kind of a new one for you. And you see I'm already selected on green, so it just basically filled our entire area with green. So we have our color picker, and then we have a new adjustment layer, except now things are a little bit different. Remember before we did a black and white layer and it gave you the little icon here, and then we didn't worry about the layer mask. We just left that blank because we were affecting our entire canvas. Well, now because we have a selection active when we created our adjustment layer, it has turned that into a layer mask. So this is our mask, and it's masking off just this area. So we're only doing our adjustment to what we've selected. And instead of bringing up the properties menu, the solid color adjustment layer brings up the color picker. So the green obviously doesn't work. So we're going to go to kind of a purple, and it's going to look weird at first, but you'll see how it's going to work. We'll go like right here somewhere. It doesn't actually totally matter. And we'll just click OK. And then we have a couple of options. I talked briefly with you about blending modes, and when it's on normal and at 100% opacity, it's just a blank screen. Oops, I just clicked over linear burn. And so you can see that when I go to these different blending modes, it has a different effect for the way that you can see the image from underneath. And most of them aren't super great, but that's okay. But for instance, look at soft light. Even with it at 100% opacity, it's starting to look a little bit reasonable. So let's just go with soft light. And then I'm going to reduce the opacity. And you can either click here and drag it down, or you can just click right here. You'll notice I get the little hand, and it has these little arrows that you can barely see. But I just click right there, and I just drag. I hold the mouse down, and I can drag all the way down. And if I go to 0, that's our original image. If I go up to, say, 35, 40% though, it still looks pretty natural, partly because we have this blending mode and partly because we're making this adjustment layer transparent. So you can sort of see through it, but you still get some of that color, right? And we can look at different blending modes with that lower opacity because sometimes they look pretty good. But see, these are kind of all washed out and kind of strange looking. Multiply is not terrible, but it definitely knocks out a lot of the highlights. But just to kind of give you an example and give you a little introduction to these things. That one's kind of got an antique look. It looks like, it reminds me of an old 50s diner photo. There's a few different ones. That one's kind of interesting. Gives that real rich brown to it. But we are going to go with soft light. Oh, that'd be kind of cool, purple. Let's go with soft light though. And then to see the changes in the effect that you've added, you just turn this off. Okay, so after having added this kind of richness to it, when we turn it off, those coffee beans look kind of brown and dull, don't they? But when you do that, they look kind of more rich. And you know, maybe I've gone too far, so subtle is always better. So we go down to like 27, and we'll toggle back and forth there. So it's a subtle shift, but it really brings a lot of richness and color, especially with this really intense yellow background. You want these coffee beans to have some pop and some life, right? Okay, and you can sort of see along the edges, things look pretty good where we did our selections well. But if you continue to follow your eye around this corner and you get to this part right here, and I'll zoom in so you can see, you can see where I did that selection and I left part of this shadow selected, and you notice how basically it looks like there's a stain in the shadow. It looks like a purple stain, right? And if I increase the opacity, it's going to get more and more significant. That's why it's important to do a good selection, okay? But let's just zoom back out, and I'll show you one more cool trick. I'm getting a little ahead of myself because we're going to talk about layer masks a whole bunch later. But if we wanted to fix this little guy right here, we could go into our layer mask. You double click on it, and it's going to go into this masking mode. And we can go get our lasso tool. Let's use our shortcuts. Hit the L. And we're going to subtract from the selection, right? So we're going to hit the Alt key, and we're going to go in here and I'm not even zooming in. I'm just going to do this really quick so you can see. Okay, so I just removed that selection. Obviously that's a little messy, but you can see that it improved it. And then you hit OK, and we've taken that part out. Obviously you'd want to get this corner and do it smoother and everything, but you see the point. Okay, so that's how to basically modify your selections and improve your selections so that when you make changes to an image, it's going to look sharp and clean and professional. Okay, so go download this, make yourself a copy of the layer, do your selection, create an adjustment layer, and then play around with the colors. You can do different colors if you want, but that purple just happens to kind of suit the mood of this image. But you can play with different colors and different blending modes and opacities and see what you can come up with, okay? Make sure you post your final images or any other images that you play with this assignment in the Q&As so I can see them. And then I'll see you in the next lecture where we're going to talk more about layer masks and all of the magical things that you can do with layer masks. Thanks for watching.